Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Councilman John Courage, City Councilman for District 9. I know that we've got quite a few people still coming in, and so we'll certainly give them a minute or two to get hooked up. All of you right now are muted, except for myself and a couple of the speakers, but we will be inviting you to send in questions through the chat that you'll notice at the bottom of your screen. Again, welcome to this discussion about the Lorence Creek and possible development into an addition to the Greenway Trail system. I'll just start off by saying this has been something that has been brought to my attention when I was elected to council. I understand it's something that's been discussed in the general vicinity for many years. Our point today is to go ahead and share some information about the creek and how it could possibly be developed into an addition to the Creekway Trail system. Some of what goes into the whole process. This isn't a done deal. We wanted to do this because, as you may know, we put out a survey and asked people in and around the Lorence Creek area, particularly the Nectona neighborhood, which had originally presented this to my attention, how they felt about possibly developing this area. We put it out so that other communities around could hear about it. And so we've got a lot of input, and a lot of that input was more questions. And so we felt it was important to hold this meeting to explain to people how the process could work, what are some of the potential impacts to the community, and again, to hear questions, answer those questions so that we can come to a decision that the community feels is the best decision for this Creekway area. I will say that we received about 40 questions in advance. We asked people who might have questions to send them in to us. And so we'll attempt to answer those first, and then we'll get to the chat questions. How we'll do this right now is we're going to hear from Brandon Ross, who works for the city's Park and Recreation Department. Brandon has worked for the city for 19 years, and for 15 of those years, he worked on the Creekway Trail development system. And so I've asked him to explain how this process works, to give you some basic information. He'll also be answering quite a few of the questions that have been sent in. When he's finished, I'm going to go ahead and do a small presentation and answer some questions that were more directed to me as your councilman. And then we'll go ahead and try and address as many of the chat questions as we can. This is open for actually about 100 people, which is the kind of the Zoom limit. But right now there, I believe, are about 50 people who have gotten in on this, and there's certainly room for others. And we hope that we'll be able to really understand more of what this process is all about, answer some of the questions about it, and then this isn't the last time we'll meet. Depending on the responses we get after this, we should be able to meet again and maybe give even greater details or answer more questions. So that's kind of the process we're going through today. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Brandon. And Brandon, if you'd like to begin your presentation, thank you so much for coming and bringing your experience today.
So you might have muted yourself on your end, Brandon.
Oh, let me just say, by the way, while he is unmuting himself, two of my staff members are here with us. You've just heard Ryder Billow, who's my communications director. Also, my chief of staff, Derek Roberts, is with us. And we'll all be listening intently to what he has to say and your questions.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Brandon. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. All right, can everybody see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right, thank you, Councilman, for the introduction. Again, my name is Brandon Ross. I've been with the Parks and Recreation Department for about 15 years. I want to start just kind of with an introduction of what the Greenway Trail System is and try to kind of explain the basis of how the program started, and then I'll get into details on the specifics and how it relates to the Lorence Creek area. So back in the beginning of the program, Howard W. Peak was mayor at the time. He had been councilman also in District 9, and he had basically rallied around the idea, along with fellow council people, of this idea of making recreational hike and bike trails along the creeks and waterways in San Antonio. In 1999, the program was developed, and then in 2000, the first sales tax initiative passed by voters to provide $20 million. That was the first of several elections that have happened since that time. There was also one in 2005, there was another one in 2010, and the latest one was in 2015. And the voters have overwhelmingly approved that program. And so the Lorence Creek Greenway program would be one that would be part of the 2015 round of funding that we've received. The program mission and goals is to basically enhance quality of life for people in San Antonio, to expand recreational opportunities and park access for people, to preserve open space and riparian connectivity for wildlife habitat, and to build linkages for pedestrian and bicycle activity, and then to increase the access for stormwater management. They have a 5-year rotation that the Public Works Department uses to basically remove dead trees and debris and whatnot throughout the floodplain system, because of course that acts as the natural drainage system for the city of San Antonio and the surrounding neighborhoods to these areas. Of the design objectives, we try to make it as sustainable and as attractive as possible. So we use native landscape materials. We avoid the creek bottom in as much as possible. The creeks in San Antonio are regulated by the U.S. Corps of Engineers, and we want to make sure that we have as little impact as possible to the floodplain, particularly including the geology of the creek and what they call the ordinary high water mark within that creekway. We try to make it as aesthetically pleasing as possible, to try to provide as much accessibility for people with disabilities as possible, and this is why the greenways have been made out of concrete and asphalt in the past. And by the way, from the beginning of the program, we've tried different materials, including asphalt, like I said, and something called cement stabilized base, which is a little bit more of a mixture of like base material and concrete. The reason that we've gone to concrete more and more is just because of the durability. On asphalt and some of the other surfaces that we have, it gets cracked, and natural surface trails and decomposed granite and things of that sort tend to get washed out and require quite a lot of maintenance. The ADA accessible guidelines require that we have certain types of slopes and cross slopes on that trail, and so we want to try to make sure and maintain that as much as possible. We do put flood warnings in at the entrances. These are basically to warn people that, 95% of the trails that we've built are in the floodplain. Those are kind of the best locations for this type of amenity. It's not mostly a developable space unless developers want to try to reclaim these areas, which does happen occasionally. But once the parkland is owned by the city of San Antonio, it's preserved in perpetuity as park space. For environmental sustainability, we preserve the tree canopy absolutely as much as possible, prioritizing native species, and then also the geology, like I said, of the creekways. We also block off areas for the purposes of trying to keep vehicular access out of these natural spaces to prevent dumping and off-roading, and then also to try to provide a presence in that space to mitigate any kind of criminal mischief in that space. We do remove invasive tree species at times to try to keep them proliferating and shading out native species. And we use low impact development principles, mostly at trailheads and parking areas. Those provide really the most opportunity for us to filter water that's runoff from the adjacent neighborhoods and try to filter it before it gets released back to the creek. So we're currently in the project planning phase now of trying to get neighborhood input and try to have the conversation with everybody who would be benefited from the project. We're then, if the will is there and we decide to move forward, it would include land acquisitions and design, construction, and then management of the program. This is where we are right now. The map that you see is the citywide system of greenway trails. We've to date completed approximately 80 miles of trail. We've got 7 miles of trail that are under construction and another 23 that are in planning and design phase, including the Lorence Creek Greenway project. And we've acquired and preserved over 1,600 acres of creekway land that's now, like I said, owned by the Parks and Recreation Department, and will be basically protected so that there's not that development encroachment into those floodplain areas. These are some of the recent accomplishments that we've done. The picture on the upper left is one. I was just out there yesterday giving a bike tour for some people from out of town. It's got a low water crossing, a low profile, low water crossing. And then you see there's a cliff in the background. There's also pictures here of Salado Creek Greenway on the upper right and the bottom right. And then the one on the left is a connection that was made to the rim development over on Leon Creek. This was one where, and we've had, thankfully, partnerships a lot of times with business owners and neighborhoods who want those connections to be made. And in this case, the rim, the people who own the rim were excited that we were going to build a trail within that land. So they gave us about a mile worth of land along Leon Creek. And in exchange, we gave them a trailhead that people can use to go back and forth from the retail to the trail. This is another trail that we built on the left over on, it's actually land between Medina River and Mission Espada. And that's some other pictures from the Medina River area. So here are some of the kind of typical amenities that we try to put on the Greenway trails. We have emergency call boxes that we put occasionally at the trailheads where there's not like another opportunity for somebody to get emergency relief if they're in a crisis. We also have bike repair stations and we have signage. Here's some of the amenities that we've put in to complement the greenways at times. You can see the girl with the butterfly bench there. We do plant native seeds, wildflower seeds along the trails at times to try to encourage pollinators, such as the monarch butterflies. At some of the trailheads, we have fitness stations, and then we do other minor design enhancements, like the picture on the bottom left. So in terms of safety, I know there were quite a few questions related to safety, and I wanted to talk about that. There are basically 3 levels or 3 approaches that we take to public safety. The park police they patrol the greenways regularly on both ATVs and bicycles. They are basically the enforcing group to enforce the park regulations. And there's also trail stewards who are basically just a helpful presence on the greenways that are part-time parks employees for the city of San Antonio. They carry water and maps and bike repair kits and first aid kits and that sort of thing. And basically, they also have a cell phone to make calls to park police or to maintenance crews if necessary. And then we have Trail Watch volunteers, which is also basically a group that the adjacent neighbors often put together. There's a training that's done at REI where you can get basic training on first aid and assistance and that kind of thing to where you can become a Trail Watch volunteer. And then park operations, that's the group on the bottom left. This is a large group that takes care of some of the parks in San Antonio. There's a Creeks and Trails group that's specifically deployed to take care of greenway trails. And so they do a lot of trimming, and they take care of trash pickup and those kinds of things on an ongoing basis. And then Clean and Green is another group that deals more specifically with parks. Those would also probably be taking care of the trailheads. And then our trades groups take care of things like cracks in the trails, or if there's a sign that needs to be replaced or something of that nature. And then, like I mentioned earlier about stormwater operations, that's not actually the Parks Department. That's the Public Works Department that does the removal of debris and down trees and dead trees when, like, on about a 5-year rotation to keep the flood waters flowing so that there's not like a dam effect in the floodway. So this is the area in question related to Lorence Creek. The property between Henderson Pass and approximately Jones Maltsberger, upstream of Jones Maltsberger, was bought quite some time ago and put into the park inventory under, I believe, who was then the District 9 councilman. I believe it was Howard Peak at the time. And then, so right now we're in the planning and scoping phase. And if the project were to be built between Henderson Pass and McAllister Park, where the trail currently ends at the dog park, there's a Salado Creek Greenway trailhead at the dog park down at the southern end of McAllister Park. If that whole length is built, it would be approximately 2 miles long. This would, like I've mentioned, provide walkable, bikeable access to McAllister Park for residents in the Nactona area. And it would be a multi-use trail, probably between 8 and 10 feet wide. It would provide a linkage to the Salado Creek Greenway, which is a 28-mile trail system. There would probably be a trailhead with minor landscaping and signage and a sidewalk connection to Henderson Pass. And then there may also be another trailhead linkage at Jones Maltsberger. On the design approach, like I said, we're trying to create an accessible experience for people of all abilities. We're trying to preserve and highlight as much of the natural environment as we can, including trees, geology, and native grasses. We want to protect the riparian habitat and floodplain along Lorence Creek. So this is another question that we got quite a bit of related to the floodplain and potential impacts of the floodplain. So the vast majority of the trail would be built at grade, which is kind of like the picture that you see here. There are places like the low water crossing picture that I showed just a minute ago, where we have to elevate just a little bit to keep it to where water is not standing on the trail. But we have to model those things. We try to make them as low as possible and as low profile as possible so that they don't have any kind of impacts to the floodplain elevation. And we have to model these things and provide that evidence to the local stewards of the floodplain that basically steward the floodplain on behalf of FEMA to demonstrate that we're not going to have any kind of negative impact to the floodplain elevations. We also are going to be preserving space as much as possible between adjacent homes and the Greenway Trail. I know that's a concern as well. And we want to try to be as respectful as we can to the adjacent residents without intruding directly on the creek, the creek itself, and try to respect both the environment and the adjacent residents. There would be no lighting on the Greenway trails. We do have lighting at the parking lots. I don't foresee having a parking lot in the Lorence Creek land. There could be a parking lot potentially adjacent to Jones Maltsberger. I'm not sure yet, but there's no lighting along the trails, and it's a day use only trail anyway, and so we don't encourage people to use it at night. And then we also try to make it as user-friendly and to have the kinds of features and amenities that the neighborhood wants. So here's some of the rules, highlights of the rules. So operating hours of the Greenway are sunrise to sunset. There's no removal of any kind of natural elements or artifacts. And the park police, again, are the ones that enforce the ordinances on the trails. There's no entry into off-trail naturally vegetated areas. And we do have, I wanted to mention, locations around other greenways in San Antonio where the Parks Department has worked with the South Texas Off-Road Mountain Bikers to build natural surface trails and maintain natural surface trails for mountain biking and jogging and those kinds of things in other areas. Those are actually managed more by the South Texas Off-Road Mountain Bikers, but they have to come to the city of San Antonio to ask our permission. In the case of the Lorence Creek area, I don't believe it would be something that would be appropriate in that area. And the reason is because there's so much mountain biking that happens within McAllister Park. I don't see us expanding that up into the Lorence Creek Park area. Among the other rules, there's no motorized vehicles allowed and there's no alcohol allowed. So if the project is going to proceed, then this is the basic timeline that we're looking at. So we're currently in planning and scoping. If everything looks like we're going to move forward, we would be working with landowners and potential partners. That would be the next step between now and next year. We would also begin design potentially this year, but most likely in 2021. And then we would also begin the permitting process that would go along with that. And then we're projecting that trail construction would start in 2022 if everything moves forward. And then we would finish construction in 2023 and then begin the management and maintenance of those areas. That's my presentation. And I do have a few questions that I wanted to make sure that I covered before I get from this. And I wanted to also ask, in just a minute, I'll get to Ryder and ask about Chuck Saxer's participation. There was one particular question that came up today about some clearing of land in the Lorence Creek area. There was no clearing of anything to my knowledge, only that there was a request that came in through a work order that was submitted by a resident on Oak Castle for the removal of a downed chinaberry tree. There was a crew of 5 that were there with their equipment this morning to basically respond to that request to remove that fallen chinaberry tree that had fallen over one of the natural surface trails. The reason that they had, by the way, 5 vehicles in there was because we're trying to make sure that our crews are separating themselves for COVID-19 reasons. That's why they don't carpool, in other words. I did want to speak to one other question that we received, at least one other question that we received, and that is regarding the property that's just north of Jones Maltzberger, just south of the Lorence Creek Parkland, and the Wounded Warriors mission that's being foreseen or envisioned or implemented on that property. And I just wanted to say that I've worked with a lot of landowners in the time that I've been doing this, and we certainly want to work with that landowner as much as possible to try to come to some sort of a cooperative solution, if that's possible, for that land. Also, just on funding, just so that everybody knows, the sales tax initiative is not something that could be rerouted for COVID-19 relief or anything of that sort. The sales tax is a dedicated funding source for Greenway trail development only. And so it's not something that we can divert to other uses. And I think that kind of covers most of the questions. There were a lot of duplicated questions that I hope I've been able to address in the presentation, but certainly like the councilman indicated, we'll take more questions through the chat box. And Ryder, can you go ahead and please share with me if Chuck Saxer is on the call?
I do not see him on the call currently. If Chuck, if you are here, you can comment your what name you're under, because I don't see his full
Okay.
name here.
Well,
in
let me just then kind of cover some of the things that he was going to speak to, and just kind of my general experience. I can just, if y'all give me just a second.
And also, Brandon, I want to mention that John Kent is here. And for those of you on the line, John Kent sits on the Trailway Creekway board that has been overseeing the development of these creekways. And I'd like John to make a few comments too, if he'd care to. Could you unmute, John?
Yes, sir. Give me 1 second. I'll get there.
John, you've been unmuted.
Yes, thank you. Good presentation, Brandon, as always. I've worked with Brandon for many, many years, and he truly is a great resource and is very knowledgeable regarding the linear creekways. This portion of the proposed creekway from McAllister Park to Lorence Creek is one of many different creekway extensions that we're looking at right now, and it's basically will hopefully improve the quality of life for folks in Niktona. But you got to understand, it's really up to the residents of Niktona to work with the councilman to decide, do they truly want the creekways in there or not. And I'm sure the city doesn't want to build a creekway into an area where the residents who would benefit from it, if it was put in, actually don't want it. So it's important that you ask your questions, you get the answers that you're seeking, and then discuss it amongst yourself and discuss it with the councilman, and then make a decision on what you think would be best for your own neighborhood. The creekways should not be imposed upon anybody, but I look at it as an asset to property values, to access to better recreational facilities and things like that. But it really is up to the locals to decide if they want one in their neighborhood.
Also, we need to say Oak Shadow community right next to Niktona. I definitely expect to hear more from the people who live in that side of the creek also. No one should be left out. John, what's been your experience? You're a big user.
Yeah, that's for sure. My experience has been overall very positive. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I stayed on the board for so long. John Courage is my third councilman that I've worked with on the linear creekways, and we found that overwhelmingly, once the creekways go in and people get used to it, the people who live along the creekways are very enthusiastic about it. If you go north of Hardburger Park along the Salado Creekway, you'll see some houses that are very, very close to the creekway. That was unavoidable because the creekway is right on the edge of a cliff. And so there was a lot of consternation when the city was planning on building that creekway right literally outside their back fence. But as the creekway was built and people got used to it, you saw more and more gates going into their back fence line. And so now I think every house that's along that section coming north out of Hardburger Park has an access gate in their fence. That tells you that obviously the residents there think it's a pretty good deal. So, and that's the feedback we've gotten from the residents of that neighborhood too. But we also had one area farther north on Salado Creek, I think it was Inwood, that actually traded some land to enable the creekway to be built. In exchange for the land, the city put in a access point on their creekway. And it's a very beautiful sort of access point with a fountain, trail signage, and I think the people in it would universally like it. Is that correct, Brandon?
Yeah, that's right. We've had that experience in a lot of cases. Inwood is one that they basically gave us the land with a commitment that we build the connection to their neighborhood, which we did. And on the other one, the piece that Chuck, that was basically the piece that Chuck was going to speak to. The first Greenway trail that we built in San Antonio was in 2008. It was along Salado Creek Greenway from Hebner Road down to what's now Hardburger Park. And you're correct. Basically, it's pretty close to some the back fence line of some homes. It's probably between 15 and 20 feet, maybe, from the back fence line of the homes there, which I don't expect it to be that close in this case. But they didn't really know what a greenway was. We'd never built a greenway before, and so that was an interesting process. There were quite a few people that had questions in the beginning. We had a public meeting that had about 150 people that came, and they were skeptical. And I think, you know, Chuck would attest to now that, yes, like you mentioned, there are a lot of people that have now their private gates that open up to that space, and they enjoy it, and it's beloved by the neighborhood now. So I think that was a success story. I can't say that that's something that would translate directly to the Lorence Creek area, but I know just that's been my experience.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. Did you have any other questions that you were going to cover, or had you covered everything? That's it? Okay. John, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm good, John. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take a few minutes now to answer some questions that are more relevant for me as your councilman to answer. Okay, and the first question is, why is this the best use of tax dollars, especially when the Linear Creek main loop still has large gaps? Well, you know, there are a lot of potential places that we could go ahead and continue to build creekways. This was one that was brought to my attention. This is one where the funding is available now. And so, you know, that's why it's been brought forward. But it's still going to be up to the community to decide, should we go through with this? Another question is, with the city looking to cut budget items and with the economic impact of COVID, is this the best way to utilize tax dollars? Once again, no. As you heard Brandon say, these dollars are dedicated toward creekway development. They really can't be used for anything else. I'm very concerned about COVID-19 and the effects it has on our community and on individuals in our community, on all of us. But this is a case where that money is only dedicated for these purposes. And so it's available, and we're going to eventually be using it. Why not in your neighborhood if it's going to improve the quality of the neighborhood for everybody around there? Another question was, what about businesses and how they may be impacted? And right now, I don't know that there are any businesses immediately around this area other than the horse farm. And I haven't heard any objections from them. I think it would probably even enhance their ability to conduct their business. But I'm open to hear from any businesses that feel like it would be impacted by this. Another question is, how will taxpayer money be used to upkeep the trail? Again, this is part of the 1/8% sales tax that is in existence that will continue to be funded through 2021 and 2022. And so that money is there, will continue to be there. But I will tell you that the city has been working with the county, and the county has accepted the responsibility of continuing the development and the completion of the Creekway Trail system after 2022. And so the perpetuity of maintaining these is pretty much guaranteed, and will remain a high priority for Parks and Recreation Department, whether it's working with the city or the county. Now, another question is, why have you not provided information to the people living in the Greenbelt in advance, since we all cannot possibly attend due to the limitations of people present. It seems like you're trying to railroad this through without listening to our concerns. And how about meeting us face to face? This smells like it's already a done deal. It isn't a done deal. This meeting is an opportunity. The vote that we put out was simply to get a sense from the community of if they felt this was something they wanted to explore more. The sense of the community that we received by almost 2 to 1 was that, yes, this is something we want to further explore. It may be a benefit we'd like to see in our community. Now, of course, that's broken down quite a bit by people who live in the general area of Nectona and the other neighborhoods around there. But of course, the people who live right along the creek have a much different view of this. And I respect that. And this is why, another reason why we want to go ahead and address these concerns, which we're doing today, and try and answer those questions that those close neighbors have. Is there a reason that the Whisper Hollow HOA was not notified of the survey that went out? It really wasn't intentional. I was not that aware. My staff and I have not had much contact with the Whispering Hollow Neighborhood Association to, I didn't even know that that association was active along the southern part of the creek. And if we had, we would have let them know sooner. But we did put it out in such a way that people who live in that community got the invitation to go ahead and answer the survey, as well as people who live in the general vicinity, because this property, if it's developed, benefits people who live miles around, not just the people who live within a half a mile or a mile of the creekway. If there are 2,000 homes and a total of 390 votes in the survey so far, why would there be only 100 slots for this virtual presentation? Well, right now there are about 50 people who've gotten on. We didn't know if we would anticipate more than 100, but Zoom, which we're using, kind of limits this. And I have to say, myself, my staff, using online technology that we're required to use today, like Zoom or WebEx or things like that, we don't have a lot of experience with that. So we're trying to do the best we can to provide as much opportunity. But we did ask people to submit questions in advance. And we would also take questions to answer after this. And we'll continue to let people in the community know about this. We overwhelmingly support our neighbor's work with the Wounded Warriors. How will this affect his organization? Well, you heard Brandon mention that. And I would say this, I would say enhancing this would really be an enhancement for the Wounded Warriors who may be using that facility. Yes, there are nature trails out there right now, but they're very small nature trails. They're not easy to use. I think this would help enhance the opportunity for Wounded Warriors, other people with disabilities who live in the community, and generally families who want to take their children out in those areas to connect to the park. Do you really want to take calm and peaceful retreat from veterans in a need of refuge? And I guess this is a related question, and no, we don't. We want to keep it calm. That's why it won't be open at night. It won't have lighting. It'll be ADA accessible. Has there been any studies on crime within McAllister Park, and what security measures are being offered by our city to those on the Greenbelt? Well, I think you heard that we do have park police. Also, the SAPD police station is right across the street. And so park stewards would have immediate contact with law enforcement if there were any needs along that area. But also, I'm really high on the idea of having a local group monitor that creekway. You heard Brandon mention there's a training program so that people from both Whisper Hollow and Nectona could organize their own communities to work on the creekway, to monitor it, to go out there, keep it clean, to help people who may have problems. It really becomes a community-wide effort and project. Not that the city will give up its responsibilities for maintaining it, but just adding as an enhancement involvement from the community. And I've always said to all the communities I've talked with, the best way to protect yourselves is to be part of that protection process by having your neighbors go and take the COPS training, or having some of them get involved in the training to oversee the trail that may develop in your community. I think those are most of the questions that I have now. Now, I know we've had some additional chat questions. So I think I'll ask maybe Ryder, if you want to go ahead and bring those chat questions up for discussion for myself or or Brandon.
You should be able to view the chat. If you click the chat there at the bottom, you should be able to read as well.
Okay, yes, I do see it. Brandon, I know you can look at it too. Are there questions right off the first 3 or 4 that you think you could answer? The first one seems to be a comment. The second one, use this extra money for improvements in McAllister Park. Brandon, could this money be used in McAllister Park? Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
hold
He's
up.
gonna-
Let's see.
want to make sure he's online again.
There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, so actually, like I mentioned, the scope of the project is to build this trail through part of McAllister Park. So, you know, I mean, it would be benefiting McAllister Park too. But in terms of building other amenities like soccer fields or baseball fields or playgrounds or anything like that, that's not really the intent of the money. The voting public, when they voted yes or no on the ballot language was specifically about linear parks. So we can't use it for other types of improvements other than the greenway trails.
Okay. Let's see, another question that we have, and I'm trying to stay near the top. For some reason, I got near the bottom. I'm sorry. Let's see. If anyone does not want to sell because their dream is to have Wounded Warrior program, why are we talking about this? Well, we don't know if anybody does not want to sell that property yet, or if an accommodation can't be arrived at. But first we want to know, is the community going to support it before we go knocking on a door and asking about buying property? Another question, what type of study do you do to ensure that the homes along the Greenway won't flood? I think Brandon's addressed that, but can you reassure that any other way? You said that it has to be, any changes in the flow of the creekway have to be approved by who? Brandon?
Let me see. Sorry about that. Let me.
Yeah, keep him open.
Yeah, he should be. I think he's.
Okay.
Maybe,
Did you hear my question, Brandon?
sorry. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why, Ryder, you're having to unmute me separately every time. I'm not muting myself. So anyway, yeah, I think I tried to cover that in the presentation, but basically we have to do flood studies. We're not going to be building anything above grade unless we absolutely have to, and that would really just be at the point at which we would need to cross Lorence Creek. Right there, we might have to elevate that crossing a little bit to keep water from settling on it, to allow water to go past it, like underneath it. I would say though that like I said, we're required by our stormwater engineering people to have a 0 floodplain increase for floodplain elevations. What we do at times is, if there's a need to, we can remove material adjacent to the improvement, like the crossing there, if needed, to make it basically balanced. But that hasn't really been much of a problem in the past. I don't foresee it to be a problem in the future.
Okay. Another question is, where do you plan to put parking? We don't want it in our neighborhood. I completely understand that. I've made a proposal, and we're going to ask Parks Department to look at this, but there is a vacant piece of property on the other side of Jones Maltzberger at the end of the bridge over the Creekway. I'm sure all of you have seen it. It's been vacant for years. There's a rundown building that's there. I think it would be ideal. It's open. But we'll see if that can be developed. But I agree, we don't want to have parking on your streets in your neighborhood. And I think that's a logical point to do it. The trail is going to be coming right under the bridge, so it would give access to the trail right there. Next question, I'm disabled and use my pool for therapy. I don't want to put up a privacy fence so people can have more concrete. Is there already 8 miles that doesn't need to be more? Depending on where that trail goes, there may be natural vegetation that will continue to provide your privacy. But I understand that concern, and that's about the only thing that I can think of. But I will say that the Parks Department is very good at adding additional trees and shrubs and things like that along these areas. And there's money for that in a separate fund. So, you know, we may be able to accommodate some special needs like that along this. But I'd say wait to see where the trail is to determine if it may be something that would impose on you. Remember, this isn't a done deal. Another question, Councilman, I understand how funding works, and that is, was earmarked in 2015. However, it's very disturbing that during this time of economic distress for so many, that this would be a project you would support versus looking to reallocate the money. And I'm sorry, but I think we've expressed that we can't reallocate the money. We can simply not spend it. But more than likely, it would be spent somewhere else for another part of the project. I strongly agree with what one of the other persons said, Carrie Brady, the person just who spoke, about reallocating that money. Another question, in the event of emergency and the narrow creek, how would emergency vehicles, personnel access the trail? Brandon, what have we usually been able to do during emergencies?
In emergencies, it would be basically the closest access point, be it Jones Maltzberger, be it McAllister Park, Henderson Pass. They would, I mean, obviously we try to, we have mapped locations before in cooperation with our EMTs and first responders to make sure that they can access those locations. If there's a fire, if there's a person who gets injured, or, you know, if there's any kind of issue like that.
Do we know if there have been difficulties helping people on the trail through EMS or things like that?
Not to my knowledge. You know, I'm sure that just logically speaking, it takes longer to get someone out of an area that's deep off of the main street grid as it does for somebody who is within that street network. Because if somebody gets injured along a trail and it's a long way from an access point, what happens is the first responders, park police and whatnot, need to basically get in there with an ATV and like a stretcher type of apparatus that they can take that person from their injury location and get them to an ambulance.
But that's the same everywhere in the trail system, right?
That's correct.
Right. But I think it is something worth exploring. I'll pursue that a little bit more with SA Fire Department and EMS. Have you seen the flooding that happens on Leon Creek when we have a downpour? What's the plan for flooding? I think we've tried to address that. Have we measured the floodplain and the water flow there, Brandon?
Not yet. I mean, we haven't, and I wanted to just kind of make that point is, I mean, we haven't started any of this. The first step in any of these projects is to reach out to the neighborhood and to try to have the conversation and get input. And so, you know, that's what we're doing now. There hasn't been any money invested yet in design, and a lot of the questions related to the specifics about where the trail would go, and do we have floodplain studies, and do we have these studies and that studies, and those kinds of things. Those are all things that would have to be done during design, which we haven't started yet, for, like I said, the reason that we're still in the planning phase.
Okay, I have two comments that are very similar coming up, and both of them indicate that they've been to McAllister Park many times, many days a week, and they've never seen any police or stewards at McAllister Park. Is there a specific schedule and rotation that you know of, Brandon, for stewards?
The trail stewards are not going to be in McAllister Park. They're going to be on the Greenway trails. So if Salado Creek Greenway Trail is extended through McAllister Park to Lorence Creek, then they would be on that trail. Park Police is basically the same in terms of their coverage of the Greenway trails. Park Police, by the way, are within McAllister Park currently, but like I said, it's something that, it depends on the location. They're deployed to parks. They also have their bikes and ATVs that go on the Greenway trails, such as Salado Creek Greenway Trail.
And I will say that I've had the opportunity to see San Antonio Park Police on Greenway trails and in the park. However, I certainly would be exploring this further to try and ensure as much as we can that they're going to be covering this, and maybe even getting the schedule that they have set for this kind of coverage, again, to try and reassure people, because public safety is a major concern, and I can understand that. Okay, if the city is currently unable to maintain McAllister Park, full of trash, debris, high grass, and recreational areas, how does it plan to keep this stretch of land clean and maintained? I have to say that that falls on us as individuals when we see this to call 311 and report it, but also you should be calling my office as your city councilman, or if you live in District 10 right nearby, you should be calling Councilman Perry's office and let us know, and let us put the kind of pressure that we can put on city departments to make sure they do their job. Right now I can tell you we've had hundreds of City of San Antonio employees who've been literally out of work because of COVID-19. Now, it wasn't something that was occurring a year ago. So if this is a perpetual problem, people need to report it and not just shake their head and say, oh, this is terrible. And feel free to report it to my office, because we follow up on every call with every department we need to. Now, McAllister Park is a dangerous park, or the #1 dangerous park in San Antonio. This is something else that I need to check up on. I've certainly heard of activities in the park that is not desirable. And I would be glad to go ahead and check with San Antonio Park Police and SAPD and get the latest report and findings they have and put that out to people in this community, so you know. But the Creekway trails have not had that kind of experience. And again, I can look for that kind of information. John Kent probably is aware of that, being on that committee, because I'm sure they hear about problems on the Creekway trails. John, can you tell me what you may have heard on that board about danger or undesirable activity along the Creekway trails?
Okay, yeah, now I'm unmuted. It's rare. It's rare. I have heard of one incident along Leon Creek several years ago, but yeah, it's very rare. I really don't have all the statistics. We don't get reports on our monthly meetings on crime stats along the trails, but I gotta say that it's not a real big topic of discussion for us on the committee.
Could you check for me as a member of that committee?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, and we'll get that information out to the community. Okay, another one about the parks, danger, lewdness. There are not going to be any restrooms. There are not going to be any places like that where we know some of that behavior has taken place. There aren't going to be any pavilions or things of that nature. I think people are worried about existing fragile species of trees and plants, but also I'm sure animals. I've heard several questions about that. Is there any record of how well animals seem to continue to interact with the trail system after they've been developed, Brandon?
Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
I mean, I was out at Salado yesterday and we saw a deer that was there. And I mean, I think probably during the construction, I mean, if I was an animal, I'd be frightened by construction equipment. I think there's probably a little bit of that during construction, but once it's built, I haven't really personally witnessed any issues. I mean, it seems to me like the wildlife is thriving. One other thing I would say is that we have to obviously comply with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Texas Department of Parks and Recreation, who have standards related to wildlife impacts and endangered species, which we have to comply with. I don't know that there are any endangered species concerns in Lorence Creek. There are karst areas that we have to have investigated, and that would be part of the design process, is that we would have to have a karst survey probably done. I would imagine this is probably in tier 3 karst area. We would need to do a karst survey because there are basically karst like animals that live in karst features that we would need to do a survey of to make sure that we don't impact anything like that. And there's also golden cheek warbler. I don't think this is golden cheek warbler habitat. But like I said, we would have to do the karst survey. And in terms of regular kind of wildlife that's abundant in San Antonio, like deer and raccoons and armadillos and squirrels and those kinds of things, it seems to me they're as abundant as ever on the greenways that we've developed.
I'll say, there still are quite a few things more on here. A lot of them are comments, and we will take all of these questions and comments, the ones I've answered and the ones we haven't, and go ahead and try and incorporate all of those as we continue forward. Another question, it's a statement. There's nothing respectful about this, not for homeowners or animals. If connecting to McAllister Park is a primary goal, the city just built a new pedestrian-friendly intersection for Burning Trail in Jones-Maltsberger that connects to McAllister Park. That's true, and that's further north, but there's other communities south and further west that would like to have that kind of connection. Many of the people who responded that they support this live beyond Nectona, between Heimer and Henderson Pass, and south of Brook Hollow. And so there are a lot of interests from people who live in the community. Others agree with homeowner comments, put the money somewhere else. I'm looking for any other questions that we can answer. I think, we still have others, but we are getting near the end of the time. All of the questions that we've gotten, we will go ahead and keep them. We'll try and answer them. We'll also be putting out a report about this to everybody. And we will be holding another opportunity to talk about this. I'll also be doing another survey since we've had this and more people have had an opportunity to ask questions, and we've been able to answer some of those questions, and more people have questions to be answered. We will go ahead and resurvey the community. Possibly some people who live further away who've heard these questions and comments are going to change their mind and say, maybe this isn't a good place to do it. Then maybe some of the people who live along the Creekway, hearing exactly what can be developed there, may feel like, maybe this is something I might want to have. behind my property. So we'll see. As I said, this isn't a done deal. We're inviting your input. We'll continue to ask for your input. And so I want to thank everybody who has come on today. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but we will. We'll respond to the ones that are in here. And I think that's probably going to summarize this informative session for this time. I want to thank Brandon for making the presentation. I want to thank John for coming on board and being here and to give his insight as a member of the board overseeing the creek development. And I really want to thank everybody. I value all of your opinions and all of your questions. And we'll continue the discussion and working on this till we can arrive at a conclusion that's going to be best for the entire community. So that's it for today. Thank you. If you have any further questions, please feel free to get online and go to either my website or go to our City of San Antonio webpage and continue to send in your questions. Otherwise, thank you very much. Have a good weekend and stay safe, everybody.